Hello and welcome to the Sportsspecific podcast, your bite-sized guide to enter the sports industry. Joining me, as always, is the strategic Ruben Williams. How are you, mate?
G'day, Ryan. I'm doing fantastic. Thank you very much. I've actually just had a bit of an injection of strategy. I've just returned from a couple of days in Sydney, and I was up at the Unisport Australia conference, which involves sitting in on the annual general meeting for Unisport Australia.
Wow.
So got to learn a bit about the business, what's going on in the world of Unisport in Australia. So feeling quite strategic, but also got the chance to present at a conference up there, which is the first time I've had to do one in person, Ryan.
Yeah.
It's a different skill set presenting in person.
Is. Yeah.
You can't edit. You can't hide behind your notes on your screen. You can't.
There's no cheeky notes on the side for you to just look at.
Nah, exactly right. You can't wear whatever you want from the waist up. It's entirely new ball game. So but a lot of fun at the same time, and really just reminded me how good it is to get out there and meet people again and chat with them face to face, even like before the presentation, after the presentation, all that sort of thing. So, had been having a good time in Sydney last week, made some good friends. So,
nice, mate.
Time to do more of it, I think.
Been clocking up some kilometres on the aircraft lately, us two. So
yes.
it's good to be back in the studio.
Absolutely,
it's been a little bit of time. Excited about this episode, so let's jump in. If you want to learn more about who we are, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. We do love LinkedIn. You'll see a bit of content from us. Or if you want to ask us any questions at all, jump into the Sportsgrade community. Absolutely buzzing the big Discord server at the moment, so jump in if you haven't already.
It is going off, and a quick shout out to one of our members, Luke Richardson, who's just landed a role. Big old Richo.
Luke Richo, his name is on the Discord server. I love that.
Yes.
Bit of nickname in him.
And he's
awesome.
just updated his title to include Netball Australia.
It's massive.
Where he has landed a role as a digital and social media officer there, covering the Super Netball League, which is fantastic. So well done to you, Luke, and well done to Netball. They are absolutely smashing in there. They just keep hiring person after person at the moment. But if you are like Luke and you want to get your foot in the sports industry, or if you are like Netball Australia and you want to find good people quickly and easily, there is something for everyone inside the Sportsgrade community. I just got a call from Athletics Australia this morning, in fact, and they were like, hey, we need someone to fill a role really quickly. How do we get involved? So look forward to seeing them in there as well. But Jump inside if you want to get amongst it.
Awesome, Rubes. Sorry, I just got to clear my throat for this one. By the way, June is a really special time. We love June.
Your birthday is in May, I thought.
It is in May, but June 5, which is exactly 1 month ahead of my birthday, is Deacon's Virtual Open Day, which is Sunday, June 5. Genuinely awesome event. I know we've done open days in the past where we've gone and seen the uni. There's virtual ones as well, which are just as good. So for those out there looking to get into uni, Deakin is your first stop. So you can explore courses, check out campuses, have your study questions answered as well, and you can do that all from the comfort of your own home. Over the past 2 years, over 100,000 people have joined the virtual open day.
That's
so
huge.
It's all about your future and where you can get to. Really exciting. So get along. Don't miss out. You can search Deakin Open Day and reserve your spot today. So get along to that. Really, really good day. So I can't recommend it enough.
Beautiful. Well, Ryan, you mentioned it's a massive episode. I'm extremely excited for this one. It's the first time that we've touched on the world of strategy, the consulting world as well. Our guest for today is Oliver Gilbert. He's a senior strategy consultant at Gemba Group. Now, Oliver started off at the prestigious Melbourne High School in the inner east of Melbourne.
You say that with such a smile on your face.
It's one of the great schools in Melbourne.
Yep.
And he smashed his school there. He went off to ANU, did a law degree, absolutely blitzed it there as well, before stepping into the consulting world with Deloitte and Macquarie. But in the back of his mind, he always knew he wanted to work in the sports industry. And so he created this incredible foundation for himself and knowledge of consulting and business as well, so that he could apply it to the sports industry at the right point in time.
Yep.
And 6 months ago, that point in time came, and he's now working with Gemba. And I think there's a lot of people who have been through a similar pathway to him and would love to apply it to the sports industry. So he's just an incredible example for those people who want to apply their trade to something they're passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. Love this episode. Sorry, my voice is a bit funky today, isn't it? It's probably just being back in the studio. But Ollie, great episode. Awesome guy. What stood out for you? Because for me, there's a lot.
Yeah, well, the number one thing that stood out for me was just how to get into a strategy role in sport. You know, he talked about all the different extracurricular activities that you need to do. I don't know if extracurricular is the right title. It's probably required curricular activities. Like you can't just go get a degree and expect to work in sport.
Required curricular. I like that.
Required curriculum. You'll understand the required curricular things that Ollie did soon enough. But then also you need to have the right motivations as well. So hearing why Ollie wanted to apply it to the sports industry was particularly interesting, and how it was so well grounded in who he is. So I think there's a lot that people can take away from Ollie's motivations and the extra things that Ollie did to get to where he is now.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved just the explanation of what strategy is. Like it's a big buzzword, I feel, in the sports industry or any industry. So getting an explanation about what work he does day to day was pretty cool. And I think a lot of people out there kind of think, hey, yeah, I'd love to be in strategy, but don't really know what it involves. So hearing some of the projects he works on, genuinely awesome.
Yeah, and very articulate in terms of the process from start to end of what he actually does too.
Yep.
And then finally, the other thing I really enjoyed was just uncovering what it's like to work at an agency. We've talked to a lot of clubs, we've talked to a lot of leagues. Today we're talking to an agency and finding out what their world looks like, because they sit across all different areas of sport. So for those who are considering a slightly different environment to take their career, Ollie paints a really nice picture of what the agency world is like.
Awesome. Well, let's jump in, grab a pen, enjoy this chat with Ollie Gilbert. Ollie, welcome to the Sportscape podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. Thanks, Ruben.
Ollie, pleasure to have you on. You've come across from the dark side of the consulting world to the bright lights of the sports industry. How are you finding it so far?
It's going really well. I've just ticked over 6 months in the sporting industry now. I thought probably 6 years of commercial experience would stand me in pretty good stead for what the sports industry holds, but I'm learning very quickly that it's not necessarily the case. There's a lot more to what constitutes a good sports organisation or a good sports league than just a profit and loss statement. So yeah, it's going well so far.
Excellent. And your boss isn't forcing you to stay until 12 a.m. at night or beyond. I hear the consulting firms and the big law firms of the world can be pretty rough at times, but is the sport industry treating you okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm being treated okay so far. We still have our moments here and there, but it's definitely not the same as it once was, that's for sure.
It's good to hear you're sleeping better. Yeah, always what you want. So Ollie, you obviously built your career early on before sort of Deloitte, Macquarie, these kind of organisations. Where did that love of sport come from, and when did you know you always wanted to work in sport?
Yeah, I was trying to think about this over the last few days. So Mum used to tell me as a 3 or 4 year old growing up, I'd be watching the Formula. I grew up in the UK, so the time zones were more favourable to watch Formula One. And she said I'd be sitting in front of the TV watching the Formula One, and I'd be able to tell, barely speaking, and I'd be able to tell Mum and Dad, the pit stop strategies, what tyres were going on the cars. So I think that was probably the starting point for my passion for sport. But it's something which throughout my whole life, through playing or following, I've been really interested in.
So you would have been all over the Grand Prix when it came to Melbourne recently, part of the 400,000 people that were there?
Yeah, I was. First time I've been in a couple of years, and it was a pretty eye-opening experience in terms of, first of all, the number of people there, but also seeing live events back in Melbourne on that scale. It was pretty amazing, and I think that's what Melbourne's all about. So
yeah. And when you talk about playing sport, we did the Formula One interest carry across to your Saturday sport, or were you playing other things?
Mate, it did it. It drove an interest when I was like 7 or 8 to become an astronaut, but I worked out pretty quickly that I was no good at science and no good at maths. So just pretty standard footy in the winter, cricket over summer, bit of running here and there, and water polo at school. So try to play as much as I can outside of school and university and that sort of stuff.
Brilliant. Well, we've heard that you had a bit of time working at the MCC. Is that correct?
Yeah. So when I started as a grad, my job was working in mergers and acquisitions at Deloitte, but I loved sport. It was, as we talked about, my number one passion. So I knew outside of my day-to-day I wanted to be involved to some extent. And one of my friends at the Melbourne High Footy Club worked at the MCC on weekends, or at the MCG on weekends. And I was like, you know what? It's something a bit different. I get paid to watch footy in an aisle for free 2 or 3 times a week. What a great opportunity and what a great way to spend my weekend. So I'd be working Monday to Friday. We were working based in Melbourne, but working out of Sydney for the best part of 2.5 years. So first flight up on Monday morning, last flight back on Friday night. And then I'd usually roll into a footy game on Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening, and then Sunday as well, and then go again.
Oh, so this is while you're working full-time, not while you're during school or at university?
No, this is while I'm working full-time as a grad.
Wow.
So, yeah, we'd be clocking up some pretty big hours during the week, and then I'd fly back to Melbourne, I'd play reserves footy for Melbourne High, and then I'd roll to the MCG that afternoon or that night. And
so based in Sydney at that time?
Yeah. So our team was based in Melbourne, but all our work was in Sydney, so we were flying all the time. Yeah. So in terms of that MCG story, so the job that I got was to basically work as a casual aisle person. So showing people to their seats, checking their tickets, letting them know where to sit. So I was doing that for probably 12 months. And then there were times where, you get put in a bad part of the MCG. Like I remember so clearly to this day, being behind the Collingwood cheer squad one day when they were getting absolutely pumped, and it was just chaos. Like people throwing beers everywhere, fights, and I was like,
oh, no.
Is this really how I want to be spending my weekends? All my mates are out there having fun. But randomly I got tapped on the shoulder by a lady who worked for the MCC. So just out of nowhere, she's like, I've been watching you for a while. I really like your demeanour. I'd like you to sort of come up and meet the MCC committee. So just out of nowhere, and I'm wearing my big sort of ugly green and orange MCC or MCG outfit. Met the MCC committee and they were like, we want you to work for us on match days. So I went literally from being the most junior person at the MCC to probably the most senior person out of 1,000 employees in the space of 5 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
So in terms of what my role was at the MCC, I was basically the match day assistant to Stephen Goff, who at the time was the CEO or president of the MCC. And I'd work on the door. If he needed me to run upstairs to the office and get him any fact or figure, it'd be helping out with that sort of stuff. And it just gave me access to the who's who of sport in Melbourne and across Australia, I guess, which that's what gave me, again, going back to your question, that's what gave me the fuel to be like, this is the industry that I want to work in because, on a match day, you might have the club boards, you might have the AFL exec, you might have people from all around Australia. We had Joe Biden in when I was there, which was pretty cool.
Yeah. Far out.
Was that game? I remember that.
Yeah. So that was massive. I've never seen a level of security like that before, and obviously that was before he was president. But that sort of gave me access to people within the industry, which all of a sudden I really respected. But I learnt that there's a career in sport for people who really want it.
That is incredible. How long were you at the MCC for?
I was there casually for, I reckon, 2.5 years. And for 1.5 years, it was in that capacity working for the MCC committee.
And that's an incredible amount of time to work 7 days a week on top of the stress of the consulting world.
Yeah. It was... I look back on it and really don't know how I did it. And I remember so clearly... One of the major things where I'm like, okay, something needs to give way was I sat down with my parents one night after a long shift at the MCC and they're like, you get off a plane, you put your washing in the washing machine and then you're gone for the weekend and then we see you for a little bit on Sunday night and that's it. And they're like, something needs to give. Like and this was before flexible working. They're like, you can either peel back Deloitte to 4 days a week if you want to continue the MCC, or give up the MCC, and very reluctantly I had to give up the MCC, which felt like going through a breakup, to be honest. I was devastated. I used to sit at games for the couple of weeks and months after, looking up at the MCC committee box being like, I wonder what's going on up there, instead of watching the footy, but
I'm missing it. So that role though, so you went from just ushering to then like finding info. Do you mean like if he's meeting with people and he needs something on what the MCC is doing, you go and find it for him?
Yeah, exactly right.
Wow.
In the space of 2 minutes. So, going back to how sometimes luck can influence your career, that's a massive part of it for me, because I think without that moment of being tapped on the shoulder, I would have never got access to the people that I did in terms of advice and mentorship, and then probably wouldn't have understood what working in the sports industry entailed. So
make your own luck, though, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
As you said, the demeanour part of it.
Yeah.
You obviously were pretty good at ushering. You're pretty nice, decent guy. So it's like, it pays to do that right.
Yeah, exactly.
We've got quite a number of listeners who do work casual jobs in sport, probably doing similar sort of activities to what you were doing.
Yeah.
What were you doing during your time at the MCC that made this woman come and tap you on the shoulder? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people who would love to have that sort of elevation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think number one, always try and smile and be polite and do the right thing by people. I think manners go a long way for sure. But I think for me at the time, I didn't feel like that would ever lead to a career or it would ever instill a drive to work in sport. But a job in sport doesn't have to be the CEO of the AFL. Like literally starting as, cleaning the grounds at a local footy club, being on a local committee, volunteering, whatever it might be, is genuinely a step in the right direction.
And I think you may not feel this because you're so passionate about it and loved being in the MCC every single day, but I think there's a level of humility to be able to step back from the work that you're doing in the consulting world and say, I'm going to give my time to the MCC on the weekend for a much lower pay to watch these people throwing beer around and make sure everyone's safe and having a good time.
Yeah.
And I think that's very comparable to other people who are looking for something else to add to their resume and want to make it in the sports industry, but are unwilling to put their time into a grassroots club or otherwise. But, you're a perfect example of someone who's willing to go that extra mile, find time somewhere, make a lot of sacrifices, and it's worked out extremely well for you. So I don't know if you've ever felt that way, but I think it's a thing that's worth recognising.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Like I remember there would be times where I'd be on the train on the way into work being at the MCG, particularly when I was an usher, and I'd always think, what if I run into someone from work, or what if I run into my boss or whatever. And I did a couple of times, and they'd always say to me, on the Monday or the following week, you were so buzzed doing what you were doing. Like it just seemed like you genuinely loved your work. And it's just a reminder that, sometimes you have to sort of throw prestige or what you think, your self-perception or whatever it might be, to try and forge or follow your dream.
The other great example who we've had on the podcast is Carlo Kasparian. When he was 29, he was living over in London and just working for a marketing agency there. He went to volunteer for the Chelsea Foundation, completely unpaid, but he did that to get experience to start moving his career towards the sports industry. And again, I thought, you're almost 30 years old. He's thinking about getting married and having kids. Volunteering is probably not on most people's agenda at that point in time, but he's landed as a general manager of media and marketing at Football Australia now, which is exactly where he wants to be. So I think both of you are incredible examples of, going that extra mile at any stage of your career to get where you want to be.
No, I appreciate that.
Also looks pretty good on a resume where it says you're working full time and then you've got a second job there.
Yeah.
It shows you're pretty keen to go the extra mile. So maybe a little tip for young players out there.
Yeah, I think so for sure.
Last one on the MCC before we continue. But when Shane Warne passed away, they were very quick to announce the Shane Warne Stand as a renaming of the Great Southern Stand. In my mind, I'm thinking someone at some point in time in the background has thought there's got to be a point in time when Shane Warne gets the naming rights to this stand. Was that in conversation when you were around at all?
It definitely wasn't in conversation. I think sport has an amazing way of respecting its heroes, definitely. Yeah. And I think obviously with Shane gone far too early, but it's the ultimate respect, right? The MCG was his playground. So definitely no conversation, but regardless of if he passed away early or, down the track, I think there definitely would have been a stand of some sort named after him.
I love that saying. The MCG was his playground. That's like one of the great compliments, I reckon. So let's jump to your time at Deloitte and Macquarie, and I'm keen to understand sort of being in those roles. How did that prepare you for working in sport, and what are some of those skills that you learned on the way that's really held you in good stead?
Yeah, I'll probably go back one step and sort of explain why I went to Deloitte as a grad in the first place. So I went to Melbourne High. Everyone at Melbourne High does like heavy maths, heavy science. It's just the way that it goes. But I really wanted to follow subjects which were more related to sport. So I did like physical education, health and human development, which the school wasn't really too well equipped to teach. But I just really wanted to do it because I loved sport. So was working through, I really wanted to do sports science at uni, which was a fairly low enter score at the time. Did really well at school, topped the state for health and human development and PE. And
we noticed on your LinkedIn account.
I've got to take that
Your
down.
LinkedIn is special. I won't say.
I've got to say.
Scrolling down, I was like, ATAR of 99.5.
I said I wasn't going to say.
I've got to take all that down.
Brilliant LinkedIn though.
It's too long ago. But I really wanted to do sports science. A lot of the advice I got from people at school was do something. If you want to work in the sports industry genuinely, do something commercial first. So I went away to ANU and did a law degree because I wanted to go down the path of player management. I thought at the time that was a lot more glamorous than the reality of it.
I think everybody does start with player management.
You certainly did.
I certainly did. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you watch all the American movies and think it doesn't get much better than that.
Moneyball, Jerry Maguire, all these ones that just make it look amazing. It's probably the closest you can get to the real thing. So I think that's
agreed.
When you realise you're not going to play AFL, then that makes sense.
Agreed. Agreed. I went away to ANU and did law. Worked out pretty quickly. I didn't want to be a lawyer. So went through sort of the grad application process and started as a grad in M&A at Deloitte, which gave me just a really good business foundation. We worked across a heap of really interesting projects around sort of, understanding business fundamentals. The team that I worked in was focused on integration and strategy. So what is the integration strategy and how can maximum value be derived from deals? How do you deliver on a deal promise and ensuring synergy realisation? How do you minimise business disruption? And then how do you ensure that you're tracking to plan, which crosses over so much with what we're doing now with sporting organisations. So the reason why, and I loved the team and I loved a big corporate environment as a junior. I think it's a really good starting point because our grad pool was hundreds of people around the country. So you make some really close friends and obviously build a really good network as a starting point in your career, which I really value now. But at the same time, build sort of that underlying commercial understanding of what makes a business run well, which every sporting organisation, body or league is trying to do. So that was the starting point.
How long did you spend in the consulting world?
So 3 years at Deloitte and then 2 years at Macquarie Bank.
Yep. And through those 5 years, did you always have it in the back of your mind, this is what I'm doing to prepare me for sport?
100%. 100%. I've kind of made the decision, which is not what I want to do now. Now that I've got a taste for sport, it's what I initially thought, but I was like, I'm going to be the CEO of the Geelong Cats Footy Club. That was my dream as soon as I left uni.
Love it.
We do want to get Steve Hocking on the podcast at some point.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Well, my girlfriend's father is having dinner with him this Friday night, so maybe I can pass on the message.
Hey, Steve, we've got an heir to your throne, if that's okay.
Fantastic. And so what were some of the things that you were able to use when you got to Gemba and said, hey, this is how my time in the consulting world translate really well to the sporting industry?
Yeah. So first of all, there's a huge amount of crossover. I think in terms of working in strategy, your main role is solving businesses' main problems. So being able to understand what impacts large businesses around the world and then carry that across to sporting organisations provides you with some really valuable context. But also presentation skills. In consulting, you can be thrown in the deep end where you're presenting to a board or, presenting to an executive team with minimal data or sometimes a huge amount of work that goes into a presentation. So being able to think on your feet, being able to ask the right questions to extract information out of a client. There's a huge amount of crossover.
The list could go on,
exactly.
Nice.
So what did you do by way of either networking or preparing for your job interview or even preparing your resume in a way that allowed Gemba to say, this guy is serious about the sports industry and he's got the skills to match it?
Yeah, it's a really good point because I hadn't worked in strategy explicitly. prior to going to Gemba. So obviously my grad job was mergers and acquisitions, which ties into strategy and a lot of crossover. And then corporate finance at Macquarie is even more narrow than that. So the transition going back to strategy, which I'm sure we'll get to, but no one really knows at times what that entails because it's so broad. It's a massive crossover.
So were you like, did you just find the Gemba job online, or did you?
Yeah, so
how did it come about?
It's a funny story. I got to sort of the second year of COVID and realised for me now's the time that I want to pull the trigger on sport. I was working long hours at home, 100% by myself in Excel, and I was like, I want to work in sport now. I think now's the time. So I found the job online, and it's something which really resonated with me because I knew I wanted to work, instead of going directly to a sporting body, I wanted to work on consulting projects across all sporting bodies, different countries, different sports, different stakeholder levels. So that was the appeal to me. I found the job online and applied for it. Did the initial sort of case study, which is classic for any consulting or strategy consulting interview. The case study was around the AFL expansion or potential AFL expansion to Tasmania and building a business case for that, which was work that Gemba had previously undertaken. And doing the case study, I was like, if this can be someone's full-time job, then absolutely lock me in. I'll sign up straight away.
You're probably doing case studies in your free time.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. We kind of joke about it, but that year of everyone being locked down and being at home by yourself, I was just doing case studies by myself.
How good.
Just love it. Solving problems. There's heaps of YouTube videos out there for how you can undertake a case study and what sports case studies exist out there and that sort of stuff. And listen to heaps of podcasts. Listen to your guys' podcast. Listen to business in sport podcasts. And
who'd you listen to from us?
A long time ago. I can't remember, to be honest. But I've listened to a few.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's a pretty good tip for people wanting to do some extra work. As you just said, there's case studies out there you can just look at and you can just work on in your spare time that is just going to help you down the line prepare for any sort of situation, any role.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool, and it kind of shows how passionate you are about it, that you were wanting to do your own work, unpaid, on your own, presenting back to yourself in your head.
Yeah. I wouldn't even call it work. You're just entertaining yourself.
Exactly. And, we joked about it before the podcast as well, but once you start working in strategy, your mindset or your brain completely switches. I was parking my car in Cremorne and I was like, how can I solve Cremorne's car parking crisis? And in my head, I'm building a business case, and then I'm like, no, I'll just leave this.
Can't make a business case.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So applied for the job, was successful, was really nervous about taking it and making the transition from Big Four consulting and banking to working in an agency environment, just because I really didn't know what to expect. And I'm an ard for the first couple of months because it's obviously a massive transition, but I'm loving it and wouldn't go back.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Nice. And how did you prepare for your interview? What sort of things did you do in preparation for that?
Yeah. So main preparation tips, because 50% of the interview process was around case studies, I was already pretty well prepared for that. But for anyone wanting to work in sport, I think being across what the major issues are in sport at the moment and how sport's evolving, which you can get from reading articles, listening to podcasts, really sets you up well because it gives you enough to talk about. And then, just being across really clear on why I wanted to make the transition from corporate into sport, because I thought that would be a question that I'd get pressed on pretty hard, which I did. And then why the company or the sporting organisation. So for me, it's like, why do you want to work at Gemba as opposed to going to an AFL, going to an NRL, whatever it might be.
Nice.
That's really cool to hear that you had to be super well grounded in your reasons for coming to this job and why this. And it sounds like the perfect role for you. So I'm sure it wasn't hard for them to make a decision on you. But there are a lot of people out there who haven't done that background work, haven't figured out where exactly they want to be, what environment suits them as well. You talked about being in a club versus being in an agency and why that suits you best.
Yeah.
I think you're a great example of someone who's been super targeted in what their job hunting approach is, and it's worked out brilliantly for you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's probably another piece of advice. there's so many jobs in sport out there, and I think sometimes you can look at it two ways. One, it's like you can take any job and sort of swallow your pride a little bit and just start somewhere and navigate your way through, because there's definitely opportunity to do so. Or you can sort of undertake the approach that I did and be really targeted. And for me, it was like Gemba or bust. It's like if I don't get this job, I'm staying at Macquarie.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it just depends on your approach and what you're wanting to get out of a job in sport.
Yeah.
You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but there's a lot more money in consulting than there is in sport.
Yeah.
Was that ever an issue for you?
Yeah, it was a massive issue. It was a massive issue, but there's a lot more to life, I think, than just money. And I think if you're waking up every day with purpose and you're enjoying your job, I sort of have faith that everything else will look after itself. Yeah.
And you don't regret that now at all?
Sometimes when I see my electricity bill and my water bill, but not at all.
Nice.
So good.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear some differences in the culture between going from a Big Four to a sports agency.
Yeah.
I mean, not knowing what it's like in, well, both really, but like I can imagine there'd be a bit of a world of difference.
Yeah,
So
massive.
What are some of those?
So the major difference for me is size of teams and size of businesses. So I remember my first grad event at Deloitte a couple of days after starting, and you meet your graduate cohort from around Australia. I don't know the exact number, but it would have been over 500 people. And so you're meeting just a huge number of people, and you get resourced into project teams, which are like really well structured, because a lot of the Big Four, they're the hierarchies from partner straight down to grad. It's a tried and tested business model. They're really structured in how they manage projects, how they resource projects. You're usually working on one or two projects at a time, have a very distinct and clear role within that project. And comparing it back to a sport analogy, if you look at a Formula One pit stop and everyone has their specific role and that's their role that they're really good at, and the team just builds around that, that's sort of how, definitely in M&A, we structured our teams. Now I'm working in a strategy team of 4 people, soon to be 5, across 8 to 10 projects at any time. So there's a massive shift in terms of the diversity and spread of workload. But also from a cultural perspective, you're working with a much smaller team, which means relationships are so much more important, because you need to be getting along well with and trust and respect the people that you're working closely with as well.
And like a lot more, there's a lot more responsibility on each person. I can imagine it would be hard to have a little piece of a project, and now it's like you probably have to lead multiple. Yeah. And the onus is on you, whereas like before you can probably bounce off people a lot easier to get that input. Yeah,
exactly. And there's pros and cons to that. The pros are in a smaller team, you get loaded with responsibility. An analyst in our team yesterday presented to Arsenal on their licensing strategy by himself.
Wow.
Wow. That's an opportunity that in a massive company you wouldn't get for years.
That's probably like a really good point about working in sport. Like you get those opportunities, whereas in these huge companies, like you're going to have to work for a long time to get the opportunity to present to Arsenal.
Yeah.
So that's probably a big plus for people wanting that experience. Is like you're going to get that sooner. Yes, you're probably going to get paid a little bit less, but you're going to get that experience way sooner than if you were, working in a Big Four or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So probably the main difference is number of people and the size of the business. But I definitely see that as a positive. I never had the opportunity to be involved in like team financial planning and resource planning and setting budgets and all that sort of stuff, which now I'm getting the opportunity to do so. And that's something that in a larger company you wouldn't be doing unless you're part of the partnership.
Yeah. What about the influence of others on you in terms of how did the people in the consulting world influence your world, and then how did the people at Gemba and in sport, what sort of influence have they had on you, and how do they compare to each other? Yeah,
so in terms of my career, I always try and have mentors at any point. It's just the way that I sort of work best is having someone, male or female, 5 years older than me. That's for some reason the time frame that I always set, being like, in your career and in your life, that's what I aspire to, and I use them as a role model and I bounce ideas off them. I was really lucky to have that in consulting. Obviously, you're working with some really smart people all the time who, we talked about before, what I was doing during my grad years, but then there's people who are senior management consultants, directors, partners that have 3 kids, they're volunteering, they're on 10 boards, they're doing so much. And I think having someone to bounce ideas off, to get advice off, but also who you can provide value to as well is really important. So I definitely had that in the consulting world. And then from a Gemba perspective, you're working with some of the smartest people in sport all the time. So being in a smaller office, there's probably 25 or 30 of us in the Melbourne office, all super passionate about sport. You're bouncing ideas off each other all the time. And I could count, I couldn't begin to tell you how many times we've come up with every idea under the sun that's going to change the landscape of sport globally over a cup of tea or something. But I think in both aspects, you develop mentorship and close relationships with people that you can really look up to and learn a lot of.
And what do you think are the main benefits from the people in either side of the different industries?
Yeah, so I think from a consulting perspective, I think coming out of university and not really knowing what to do, working in consulting is a really broad place to start because you get to understand businesses' problems. There's a lot of presentation required, so you're dealing with clients and stakeholders, and you're learning from people that have worked in that industry for a while who can provide you with really good advice or skill sets. And then from a Gemba perspective or from a sporting perspective, as I said, you're just dealing with people who love sport.
Awesome.
Let's delve into your role now because and we've covered a bit about it, but a lot of people, I think, don't understand what the word strategy means in a number of roles in sport or just working in general. So, like, what are some things that you work on day to day as a strategy consultant for the people out there who aren't really sure what strategy means in all this?
No worries. So I've tried to split what we do into some really clear buckets, just to provide a bit more context. So in terms of some of the stuff that we work on, strategic planning, commercial strategy, participation product development, fan engagement strategies, digital strategies, broadcast rights strategies and valuations, league expansion analysis, and infrastructure business case development. So some of the projects that I'm... So to answer your question, everything under the sun. In terms of what I'm working on at the moment, I'm leading a project around a media rights valuation and negotiation for a big sport, which is going really well. It's really interesting. I think the shifting landscape of broadcasting, largely driven by COVID and largely driven by the younger generation having appetite for not watching full sports, watching those KO minis, and the change in the digital landscape means that a lot of organisations are shifting towards shorter broadcast deals because the media landscape is changing so rapidly. And then we're working on a lot of stuff with league expansions as well. Every league wants to expand as much as possible as they can in Australia. We've seen it recently with the NBL and the success that the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers have had. There's always commentary about AFL and NRL expansion and what the impacts are to existing teams and what it would look like for a new team. So there's some of the key projects that we're working on, and then really clear strategies for sporting organisations as well. So developing 10 or 20-year strategies around how can you drive participation at the grassroots level, how can you have clear talent pathways from community level football or rugby, whatever it might be, through to the elite. How can you have supporting facilities and infrastructure to support the rapid growth of female participation across the country?
And like the nature of that work, so would you essentially, as a consultant, would you go and embed yourself in these organisations essentially? Yeah. And then you basically get told the problem, you go away, work on it for X amount of time, you present back, and then it's up to them what they do with that information? And it's on repeat essentially. And that's why the presentation skills, as you've mentioned, are so important. Yeah, and what we try and do more so at Gemba than in past organisations I've worked for is really involve whoever the client is in the strategy development and in the process. Yeah. So, so much of my day is calls or Teams videos, workshops and consultations with clients, with community stakeholders, with executives of the sporting organisation, working out what they're doing well, what they're not doing well, what the future opportunities are, how are they going to define success in the future, and then bringing that to life. So, using Gemba's intellectual capital to build out, PowerPoint slides and reports, how they can implement it successfully and measure it. It must be quite rewarding being able to see all these different organisations and how they run.
Yeah.
You know, you'd have visibility into, you know, all the big NSOs or different clubs, and for you, it's like they do things that way, they do things that way, and you'd be able to learn the best practice in a way. So you've probably got the best insight and of anybody about how to run successful organisations in a way.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And one thing, going back to what I said earlier around some of the surprises that I had probably from going from like a more commercial role to sport, is what I've seen is the leagues which are doing really well, or sometimes the clubs which are the most successful clubs, don't necessarily have the best talent pathways. They don't necessarily have the best or most capable staff. So it doesn't mean sport's not just, you know, we're making this amount of profit every year, or we're top of the ladder, or winning flags. There's so much more to a sporting organisation than both of those things. And that's something which, even though I'm only 6 months in, I'm really starting to learn.
In terms of the process of your strategy development,
Yeah.
when you start working with a new client, where do you begin?
So we always begin by understanding the current landscape of the sport. So we would build out a current landscape report which uses, again, some of our insights. So we have a full insights division which runs surveys around Australia, extracting heaps of information around what constitutes a fan of a sport, what are those fan behaviours, what constitutes a participant, how often are they participating. So we use a huge amount of data to inform sort of a current landscape or a lay of the land for that sport. And then if it's a specific state issue, or if it's a specific sport issue, really start to tie in what other sports are doing well and what we're seeing from other sports.
There you go. Very good. And what sort of metrics kind of come out of that initial landscape report?
How you grow your fan base. It's always membership, attendance, viewership on TV, digital downloads, social media interaction. There's a lot of fairly consistent metrics across all sports, which initially sporting organisations and bodies are looking to understand where they can get upside.
Yeah.
Is there any particular project, I'm just throwing this out
Yeah.
there, any particular project from your previous life in the world of consulting that's translated really well to a project that you've found now?
Not at all. Not at all. Every project is so different, and that's something that I'm starting to learn, even in a sporting sense. You know, you might get engaged to develop a strategy for a sport and win another project which is like you're developing a strategy for this sport, and in your head you'll be like, oh, there's heaps of crossover, you know, there's going to be a lot of similar issues. And then once you dig a little bit into the next step of developing the strategy, so past that current landscape and into the strategy development, you realise every sport has their own unique issues or own unique challenges which need to be addressed. So to honestly answer your question, no, because I think every project that I've worked on has just been so different.
And just in terms of the way that consulting firms operate, they seem to solve problems for a lot of different industries.
Yeah.
Do they work with the sports industry? And how come these sporting specific consultant firms such as Gemba exist when there's massive firms out there who do a lot of other stuff, but maybe not sport?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a danger of a larger organisation particularly is you can be a jack of all trades, master of none. The benefit of Gemba is we've got years of sport-specific experience. We know the majority of sports and organisations inside out. So a lot of clients come to us because of that really targeted knowledge. Again, you know, we pitch for work regularly, and you're always coming up against big companies and that sort of stuff, which presents its challenges. But yeah, I think having that sport-specific knowledge or sport-specific focus is something which companies are starting to value more and more.
Has any Big Four firm tried to acquire Gemba and just pull them in underneath their banner?
Oh, not to my knowledge, but I can definitely understand the appeal.
Nice. I think that was a good little summary of strategy. I think a lot of people needed that, so thank you. One thing that stood out to me when we spoke the other day briefly was your emphasis on volunteering.
Yeah.
And you've done, and you continue to do a lot of work with the Salvation Army, Civic to Surf, those kind of organisations. Tell us a bit more about those experiences, and you've kept on doing them, which means you enjoy them.
Yeah.
And how important is volunteering for someone who wants to work in sport?
Yeah.
And, you know, would love to hear the experiences you've had with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll probably talk more to the Civic to Surf. So when I was at university, from 2010 through to 2014. I was at a college up at ANU for 3 or 4 years. And the guy who was like the president of our college was the most amazing sportsman, like the best academically, head of our college, so up and about. But behind closed doors, he was having a really tough time. And I remember so clearly, he got up in front of the whole college, kind of out of nowhere, doing his, head of college speech or whatever, and started talking about his mental health journey. And from that, he started this charity called Batir, which is Sydney-based. They deliver, they work with a lot of sporting organisations, but they deliver sort of mental health programs to schools and universities. So what happened was, at the time, I was the men's health officer of my college. So the way that colleges were set up is you basically have your like head of college and then a series of prefects, and every prefect has a designated role. And my role was like men's mental health and men's physical health, which I loved, but also had massive challenges at the time. You're dealing with probably 150 males who, at the start when I accepted the role, I was like, oh, it'll be fine. No one's going to come to me, and no one's going to talk to me about any of that stuff. I can honestly say for the best part of a year, my door was getting knocked, 5 or 6 times a day just for a chat or for some help or some guidance in the right direction. Wow. So that's where a passion for mental health came from. Seb, who's the guy who founded Batir, then started Batir, and a couple of my mates were like, this is a really good idea. We want to raise some money for Batir. So they organised a run from 5 of them. They organised a run from Canberra to Sydney over the course of 7 days, and they raised heaps of money. And then the next year, I was like, that's a really good starting point for the charity. And then comes back to a consulting mindset, which I didn't know existed at the time.
Where's the strategy behind it? Come on, let's build it.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, they've done a really good job and they've raised a bit of money, but I'm going to scale this. And I'm going to turn what was a 5-person run over 5 days into a 24-hour relay, including 80 people from ANU and Sydney University. And we raised a heap of money, and it just drove a passion for me around mental health, around what those charities can do. Batir have had amazing partnerships over the years with New South Wales Waratahs and a heap of other sporting organisations. And it's interesting, like some of the insights that we've pulled out from Gemba's Insights program have said, from the survey respondents, mental health is what they perceive to be the number one issue facing sport over sort of the next 5 to 10 years. So tying that back to volunteering, one, it's really important to have passions outside of your work to keep you sane. Number two, mental health for me is something which is so important. I think it's an ongoing issue. We're seeing it in sport all the time with players taking their mental health breaks. It's really important to be able to bring the best of yourself to work and the best of yourself to your family and friends and partners and all that sort of stuff. But then 3, tying it into a sporting context, volunteering is the best way to meet people in the sporting industry, and people really respect, you giving up your time for a purpose that you genuinely believe in.
Nice. Unreal. That's very cool to see, and to know that you've continued to do that on top of what your 7-day working a week already.
Yeah.
I don't know how your clothes got washed.
But thanks, Mum.
Your calendar would be out of this world.
Yeah.
You must need some serious sorting of things.
Yeah.
What's happening?
That's funny because in sort of my day-to-day, without a calendar, I'd be pretty stuffed. I'm a bit of a shambles. I'm not very good at cooking and cleaning and all that sort of stuff, but it's a work in progress.
Yeah. I think one thing that's so apparent with you is that you're just so passionate about what you do, and the best decision I think you've made is find something that you love to do, because everything has just become so easy for you after that. It might not have felt easy the entire time, but I think people who try and force themselves into doing something that they don't necessarily enjoy but think they should be doing just find themselves pushing a boulder up a hill the entire time, whereas for you, the floodgates are open and you're just spending your entire life doing it. You've just immersed yourself in every situation possible. Jacob Tober last week, who we chatted with, he was another great example from a sports science perspective. He'd go to uni, learn the content, apply it in every angle of his life. And it sounds like you've just, dived into every situation of your life with this consulting brain that you've got, tried to solve problems along the way that you care about. Yeah. And you've come out in a very good situation.
Yeah, I agree with all of that.
I love also that you've made peace with the fact that you're following a passion and you're not following like money and wealth and things like that. I feel like a lot of people, I genuinely think there's a lot of people who would be in your position who are working in jobs that pay really well. They're working so hard.
Yeah.
And like the trajectory is great, but they're probably not loving what they do.
Yeah.
So I love how you set out from the start. You're like, I'm going to work in sport. I'm going to go through this to get some really good experience and, you know, learn and get to that point. And now you just pull the trigger and you're totally fine with the fact that you could probably earn heaps over there, but you're like, no, like I'm sticking to my guns and what I love to do and what I've wanted to do for so long.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you say that, because there's been sort of a few life moments that you get there. You know, there's times where you're working really late in the office in previous jobs, and you're like, do I really love what I'm doing? And if the answer is no, then you know you need to change something up. But the whole time I kind of had that belief that I was working towards something, which I really wanted. On the flip side, and sort of the discussion around money, like the world is changing so much. I think for our parents' generation, it's like you take a grad job in a prestigious company and you work your way up, and it's a very safe route. There's 14-year-olds playing FIFA earning millions of dollars a year online.
I heard that on the weekend. I was like, oh, wow, like we're too late.
Exactly.
Yeah. We're also not saying you're not on a bad wicket, by the way. You're probably earning great money. So yeah.
For those who do have a commercial background, whether they've done a commerce degree, economics degree, what and maybe some of them have slipped into grad roles at consulting firms or law firms, what would you say to them if they were looking at making a transition into the sports industry?
Yeah, I think there's never a wrong time to do so. I think if anything, now is a really good time to do so, because a lot of organisations have restructured as a result of COVID and are a lot more clear on the roles within their organisations and what they're trying to achieve. But at the same time, if you're not enjoying your job at present and you really know that you want to work in sport and you're working in one of those sort of commercial roles, whether it be consulting, investment banking at a law firm, whatever it is, you're on a really good path to getting there. It's just you need to supplement that with an interest in sport outside of work. Yeah.
That's a really good point about supplementing it with an interest outside of sport, because I think what a sport management degree does for most people is just say, I'm interested in sport.
Yeah.
But if you don't have sport in the title of your degree, sometimes you need to go outside of that and find a grassroots club to step into, find the MCC or something else that's, actually paints living proof that you are passionate about sport and willing to put into it. Because everyone can say, I love sport, here's my favourite AFL team, but what are you willing to do to go above and beyond what else you're doing? So I think it's a really valid point.
Finally, I've got a couple more questions. One is, what's some advice for someone just coming out of uni or at uni who have strategy in their sights and want to get into that?
Yeah, I think as a starting point, know why you would want to work in strategy and what it entails.
Yep.
I think a lot of people that are hiring for junior roles at the moment, a lot of the commentary that comes around unsuccessful applicants is they didn't really know why they wanted the job, or they didn't know what a job entails. And I think that's a product of grads sort of coming out of uni and applying for tens or in some cases hundreds of jobs and just sort of throwing the resume out into the world and just hoping something lands. Where I think being really structured and strategic in what you want to do and why, whether that's strategy or marketing or any other aspect of sport, is really important.
Yeah, nice. Mate, finally, the other day I was trolling through LinkedIn and I saw an incredible report that Gemba has just put out on NFTs, crypto, and how they're having an impact on the Australian sporting landscape. So I quickly emailed our good friends at Gemba, and I actually said this would be perfect for someone to come in and present this to the sports grad community. So we've been lucky to get you to come in next Wednesday and present that report, which is pretty exciting because I need a serious bit of knowledge on NFTs and crypto and all that kind of thing. But can you give us a little bit of a taste about what that's about? For those interested and listening, this is an exclusive Sports Grad community presentation. So if you want to come along and listen to Ollie, jump into the community. It's going to be absolutely awesome. So next Wednesday, Ollie's going to give us a bit of a teaser now to get you on board. But I'm genuinely excited for it.
Yeah, I'll do my best to wrap what is a very complex industry in the space of about 15 or 20 seconds. But in short, NFT stands for non-fungible token. It means the purchase or the transaction of a digital asset. A lot of sports are heading in that way because there's a massive revenue diversification opportunity there. The NBA have recently released their NBA Top Shots, which is a series of sort of NBA highlights which people can actually own. So you might own a LeBron James dunk, and as we were talking about before, every time that asset is viewed, sometimes the revenue flows through to the owner, or you might it's like the modern day version of footy playing cards, which I know I used to collect at primary school. But we're really excited to present on it. We're doing a lot of research around NFTs and crypto at the moment, particularly the impact that it will have on sports in the future. We recently attended a Sport NXT conference in Melbourne, and out of the 3-day conference, the whole buzz was around NFTs. So it's something which we're really focused on. It's super early days in terms of the sporting landscape, but something which I think is really important and interesting to be across.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, I look forward to that. I think you guys are extremely well placed to deliver that. So, can't wait to share that with the team.
Cool. Thanks very much, guys. And just a compliment from us to you. As I said, before we went online, I've been following the sports grad journey for a little while now, and I think what you guys are doing is really important in terms of the sport industry itself. But I know I was so lost coming out of university and trying to navigate a career for sport in myself, which luckily for me it's worked out. But the industry's in a better place with guys like you doing your stuff. So really appreciate it.
That's too kind, mate. Thank you.
It's way too kind. Thank you, mate. It's been great to chat, and the insight we've got from today into strategy, but also just your journey to get there has been awesome. So really appreciate that. There's going to be a lot of listeners who have learnt a lot from this episode. So really appreciate you coming in, and we can't wait for your prezzo next Wednesday.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Alrighty, well, awesome chat with Ollie there. That was one of the great episodes, I reckon, Rubes. Just good conversation and just some great explanation around sports strategy and what is involved in that world, because it seems there's just endless possibilities with that line of sport. So what were some things that you took away from that?
I think the number one thing I took away from Ollie is just how passionate he is about this and how well his skill set is suited to what he does.
Yeah.
And there's a great quote that goes by, find the thing that looks like play to you, that feels like play to you but looks like work to others. And I think Ollie has absolutely found that. And I think that's probably the best decision he's ever made, because he's now out there every day, and as you heard, in his own time during COVID, creating consulting case studies for himself to go and solve. So that's come from having a really good think about, what problem do I want to solve? Ollie's thought about, where do I want to spend my time? What problems are around the world that are worth me spending my time, that I'm actually interested in? Because he duxed health and PE all through school. He could have gone down the health route quite easily and been amazing at that. But he decided, this is what I'm most interested in. This is what I care about deeply. Yeah. This is how I'm going to apply my trade. And I think that decision has just made every other decision after that much, much easier. So I think one takeaway from Ollie is, find the problem that you are really invested in and is worth solving, because you're going to enjoy it the most.
Yep. I'm taking away the fact that all he really did when he was working casual shifts at the MCG, you guys want my voice again, is just nail his job at the time. And a lot of people say to us, I'm working casually at the moment, what do I need to do to get a full-time job or, progress in my current role? To be honest, all he did was just do his job really well. And that's almost all that matters when you're in that job. Just nail what you're doing, and then those extra opportunities will come. So for those out there in casual roles, just kill it. Absolutely dominate it, because he got handpicked because I think he mentioned demeanour. It was his demeanour that got him into that position. So if you can just do your job really well with a smile on your face and you enjoy it, then that's the first step to getting something else down the track. Yeah,
and you're absolutely right. It is the first step. As we said at the start, they're not extracurricular, they are required curricular. You have to be doing something else. A degree is not enough, or just a usual job is not enough if you want to step across. And then finally, I think a really important takeaway for those who have a similar background to Ollie is just consider the right time to get into sport. Because as Ollie was extremely mindful of, he wanted to spend time in the consulting world to build up the foundations of his skill set that he could then apply to the problems he enjoyed solving most. So he was really mindful of not getting into sport too soon, spending some time in diverse industries, working across a wide range of problems, and then adding to that those required activities as we talk about.
Buzzword.
To then 5 years down the track after stepping out of university, then transitioning into sport. So everyone's situation is different, but just have a think about when is the right time for you to step into sport.
Yeah, I love that. A reminder as well, so next Wednesday, the 25th of May, we've got Ollie coming in to present on NFTs, crypto, and the Australian sports landscape, which we are very, very excited for. This is a SportsGrad community exclusive presentation, which is really exciting. So for those out there who haven't jumped into the community, this is a great opportunity to jump in, have a look at Ollie, see what kind of webinars we're doing inside, and it's a great sort of test and learn for you to see, how the SportsGrad community operates. So come along and listen to Ollie, an expert in this space with Gemba. It'll be an absolute ripper webinar with plenty to listen to. So get involved.
And if you've got any other questions for Ollie based on what you've heard today, this is exactly the time to connect with him, to ask away anything that you need to. So be sure to jump in.
Yeah, very exciting. I'm pumped. Alrighty, well, find us on LinkedIn, plus be sure to jump into the SportsGrad community as we've mentioned. We'd love to chat with you on there. Head to sportsgrad.com.au/community to join, or head to the link in our show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.